Greetings, adventurers! Welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Today, I want to talk about that LARP that I've been kind of gushing about lately. But
Are we talking about LARP?
Oh no! So yes, to do so, I have a very special guest on today.
Which he very much prepared for, which is why I'm sitting on a yoga ball.
It's a yoga ball. It's comfortable. You're fine. So, for those of you who can't recognize her as just being kind of a smart-ass bird on the corner of the screen, this...
I can move down.
No. This is my artist/editor/business partner, Middle Miss Red, a.k.a. Maddie.
Hello.
I'm dealing with her presence today because she actually happened to have gone on that LARP with me as well.
Just happened to
tag along.
Just wandered in.
So we thought it would be actually really fun to kind of talk about our experience of what the LARP was like for those of you who might be thinking about going or just kind of enjoy hearing about LARPs. That said, it is going to be a different episode than usual. We're not going to be like making a thing. We're just going to be talking about our experience LARPing. So if you're more here just for crafting stuff, maybe this isn't the episode for you.
I mean, we made a lot of experiences.
We didn't make a lot of experiences. Look what she did. Just knitting it together.
I'm a bow knitter.
We'll get into that. So as I've mentioned on the last few episodes when I've been making stuff for this LARP, we had the opportunity to go on our very first LARP adventure this past,
LARP venture.
LARP venture 2 weeks ago at this point now.
I honestly have no idea time passes.
Time passes and it's crazy. So this event was called Reckoning and it took place in Indiana, yeah?
Like on the Indiana-Cincinnati border.
We're around
Ohio,
there.
yeah.
Beautiful Indiana.
I believe the quote that all of us gave as we drove from Cincinnati to Indiana was, Ohio but less.
Oh, fuck. There's a bunch of people from Indiana who are just like...
And I don't mean less important. I just mean like there was more forest, less buildings. It was what was said.
So this was actually a LARP that we didn't know much about going into it. I guess it had a Kickstarter that met its goal really quickly. But we were invited by a friend of the channel and other YouTube channel that you should be watching, Living Anachronism. The link to the description below.
And how near to the LARP did we get invited to it?
Like the last minute.
Like
the
you
cutoff.
got invited, what, like 2 weeks before?
Yes.
And then we were planning.
I want to tell the story. No, I want to tell the story.
No.
She was a sad sack for like a week.
Okay, no, you tell your story, and then I'll tell how you're an ass during it.
I got invited to this thing, and like almost immediately, I was like, yes, absolutely, I want to go to this thing with you, my friend. This one here at the time wasn't able to be going. She had some other engagements that were supposed to be happening.
What were those other engagements?
I don't recall, really.
I think it was that we were planning a trip.
Inconsequential at this point.
You waited till last minute to tell me that you couldn't go.
Anyway, so we got invited to this one, and I decided that I wanted to go just immediately. And then there was a lot of emails and stuff back and forth about the LARP and talking to Thomas, the person who ran it along with his team. Also, thank you, Thomas and team. You guys are incredible. But so turns out Maddie actually she handles my emails. So
I got to read all of them.
And just progressively get sadder and sadder.
You have to understand that we've been friends for like over 5 years now. And throughout our entire friendship, which started with D&D, we always talked about going to our first LARP together. So this asshole just like straight up was like, I'm gonna go to this LARP. Bye.
Anyways, when it came down to like the wire, like the day before the last day that you could go to it, we were talking about it. She's like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm kind of upset that I'm not able to go. I'm like, well, why don't you just join? She goes, well, I thought the last date was
in one
passed.
of the emails that came to you, it was like, be careful because the ticket ends soon.
Yeah, so she thought it had passed.
The date.
So I'm like, no, that's tomorrow. So like immediately she jumped on it, and LARP adventure to ensue.
LARP Adventures.
So yes, that's how that progressed.
Yeah, no, I had to make all of my things in like a weekend.
Okay, so we should really rewind a little bit and tell people who aren't sure what LARP kind of is, what LARP is, really.
What? Tell me, what is LARP?
What is a LARP?
I want to know emotionally, what is LARP to you?
How does it feel? So LARP stands for Live Action Role Play, right?
Good job.
Thank you. Basically, if you've played like D&D or you're familiar with anything like that, it's like a live version of that.
D&D in person. Although it depends on the type of LARP.
Right.
Like some of them are more combat focused, some of them are more role play focused. It's the same as D&D where like you can have a game where like you fight more, you can have a game where it's more like social, political or whatever. And they come in all different genres.
Yeah, but the basics of it, you're put in kind of this fantasy world, and it can go from anywhere like super high magic to really like almost low magic, almost like
or vampires.
Vampires,
or
yeah.
Sci-fi.
There's a whole bunch of different
or
ways you can
Civil
do
War
it.
reenactment.
True. Basically, you're playing a character in this world, and when you're in the world and you're in character, you're doing things not as yourself, but as the character would do it. Right? And instead of like D&D where all of those movements and whether or not you can do something is on the roll of a dice, you actually do it. So if you want to try to convince somebody, you have to walk up to somebody and actually convince them. If you want to try to beat them in a fight, you have to go fight them.
If you want to if you want to facilitate a bunch of things for different people, you have to run up and down a hill 15 times a day.
You do, in the heat.
In the heat.
So yes, with that kind of broad outline done.
Let's talk about LARP. This LARP specifically. Now that we know what a LARP is, what makes Reckoning itself? So I think what set Reckoning apart was that it was a much more focus on immersion. That we focused more on like the role play aspects more so than combat. Although the combat did play a big role.
Sure.
Like we had to submit our costumes for approval. We had to have
we had to submit our tent for approval too. Our weapons.
We had our weapons, everything checked. Make sure everything was in character enough that it didn't break anyone's immersion. Story was a big aspect of it.
And if you want to LARP, you're going to hear that a lot too, like your immersion and breaking immersion or whatever. It's very much, it's how you're playing the game, right? So if you're somebody who just kind of wants to play around and fight or whatever, and immersion and story isn't as important to you.
There are LARPs for that.
There are LARPs for that, but there's also...
They're real big.
Just because that's not your thing doesn't necessarily mean it's not the people around you thing. For them, the game of it is acting that part and being that different person and all of the conversations and political things they're going through or whatever. So, like, breaking immersion isn't just kind of shortening your game a little bit or messing with your game, but you're really kind of messing with the people around you. So, in fact, there's even, like, a little sign language thing where you tap the top of your head, and that means you're talking out of character.
You, like, pull someone aside or, like, out of character.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And it lets other people around you know, like, this
like,
conversation is out of character.
Shield you from their perspective at that point. There was a few points where that came up in game where, I know we talked about with Thomas that, where there was a few points where logistically some things had to be brought in, like food or whatever, that would have broken character. And it's surprising when everything else is so immersive that you just glide by those things. Like there were airplanes going over, there was cars driving by. Like,
couldn't even tell you a time where I saw them. Absolutely blindsided them. Yeah.
When they brought in the refresher of the water barrels in tractors and stuff, like just went right by it. Because once you're in that world, you're in that world and you're that character as long as you give yourself over to that character.
And I definitely want to talk about that too, because it was, for me, being the first time I went to a LARP, that was the coolest thing, is actually being able to be in that character so much. Like I feel like if you haven't done that, maybe if you haven't even played like D&D or whatever, there's this kind of weird precipice where once you go over it, you are this different person. Like you've taken some time, you've created a backstory for them. You start thinking like, all right, well, how would this character behave in this type of situation? And pretty soon you don't have to even think of it that way. You do it. And it might not be something you would have done, but it's definitely something the character you're playing would have done. And it's this weird, like...
It feels right in the moment, but then you look back at it from your own perspective and you're like, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But my character most definitely was, especially if it comes from an emotional place. Like, you begin to live in that character's shoes.
Right. And I think there's a good time for us to kind of talk about what the characters are. And I kind of want to preface it, too, by saying there's going to be some spoilers in here.
Yes.
And this is in twofold. So one, I don't know if the story that we did right here is going to continue onto the next one. So know that there might be some things that if they carry it over is giving away some stuff, but probably not really, I would think. Like, it's pretty major story points.
Yeah, so most of the story points also got kind of shared amongst people while we were there, so it doesn't really spoil that much. But just keep in mind that all the things we talk about as our characters and our story and all that, they're not stuff that other characters would know coming in if you choose to join Reckoning in the future. Right,
and if you are somebody who played during there, also, what's up? But know that this is very meta gaming, right?
Yeah.
So if you hear this,
part of a conversation, or you weren't
your
part
character
of a mission
doesn't
or
know,
something,
right?
Like, don't just walk in and be like, so I heard from a bird on a wire.
Yeah, no metagaming.
No metagaming.
So yeah, this is a good opportunity for us to talk about our characters. And I think,
what character did you play?
I played Gareth Hexelin. He is a sage. So I want to talk about that too. So
let's preface with what types of characters you can play.
Right.
All right, so in Reckoning, you are split into combatants and non-combatants. So combatants are either warriors or sages. Warriors are just typically like the fighters that can wield everything. They get the most money, they get the most everything. But they don't get any spells. Where sages can wield less weapons and they have less armor that they can wear, but they have these spell cards.
Right, and I think that the lore behind that too is like the metal of like metal armor messes with your ability to cast spells. Mm-hmm. So you're stuck with like leather armor, and the armor comes in certain armor points. So if you're wearing metal armor, you can get hit a bunch more times, as opposed to if you're wearing leather armor, you can only get hit like twice, and then you're pretty screwed.
Yeah, and then the non-combatants, so you kind of covered the combatant side when you played. The non-combatants was what I played, because I didn't know what I was doing. And also, I had a weekend to put everything together, so I couldn't get any weapons. So I played a bone knitter. Non-combatants are split into 3 categories. There's the bone knitters, the potion smiths,
yep,
the potion smiths, and the spell scribes. So the spell scribes, basically, they're the ones that sages can buy more spells from. So once you burn a spell card, it's gone and you have to buy another one. A potion smith makes potions that when you drink it, it heals you a bunch. But immediately. A bone knitter is able to heal you, but it takes us a full minute to be able to do so. But we basically heal almost completely. But we also get paid the least, because each of the non-combatants has a mandatory minimum of silver that we have to charge to be able to perform our services.
One thing with the amount of time it takes, I know you said a minute feels like a real long time, but it really gives them that minute to like role play that, right? So depending on how you're healing, like maybe your magic is kind of painful for them to heal, so then the person who's being healed is like, oh, my leg, like going through a whole thing, right? We had the one guy in one of the camps that was the doctor, and he used a newfangled thing called science
where he would cut you open with a scalpel.
Yeah, he's role playing like cutting people's scalpel, and people are like, oh, it hurts so much.
And he's like, everything is fine.
Yeah. It was good, but kind of coming back to the sage, which I was. So our spells are listed on these little cards, and in order to use them, you have to break them, right?
Yeah.
So that alone kind of made, and we can talk about it a little bit later on, but that kind of made for some really cool RP roleplay. In that, like, how you break those cards can be part of you casting that spell, and it's really cool how that played out, and I didn't think it would be as fun as it was.
Spoiler alert! He cast one on me.
I cast one on you, and it was probably the most epic use of that spell for me. It was really cool.
Yeah. No, I think I didn't really witness a lot of spells being cast, especially the divination one.
Yeah.
Although from what I heard, the divination one was really powerful.
Yeah.
But the ones that I did see being used were like really epic moments.
Yeah, but. Anyways, I don't want to get us too off because we have to
talk about our characters first.
So yeah, my boy Gareth, he was like a simple farm country boy. Country boy, and he had his trusty dog, Jax. But the war broke out, which we can kind of get into the lore of it in a few. But war broke out, and he found himself kind of being swept up in it, not really his choice.
Powers.
Yeah, once he realized he had magical powers, and more once his father kind of realized he had magical powers, it was like, you have a responsibility to help our cause type of deal. So
he didn't want to.
No, not at all. So he's been in it from almost the beginning of the war, so like 10 years worth of war he's been fighting.
Basically our character's entire adult life.
Yeah, exactly. Our entire adult lives have been war. So he, at this point, is just like a ranger who's super fed up with that crap now that we've reached like our time of peace. And that the event of Reckoning takes place during like this peace banquet, right?
Yeah, so a quick briefer, I guess, on the lore, so this makes sense, is that there are the Rivlins who live in the general middle of the continent.
It's called the March.
The March.
Yeah.
And then there's this big old cliff that leads to a toxic desert to the south.
Right.
And then to the north are the Vaterkin, which are like the Viking analog that raid the Rivlins, and they live in the more tundra north.
Yeah.
So from that toxic south desert comes the Hadrians, which are like the Roman Empire. And what does the Roman Empire do?
They conquer!
And that's what the Hadrians wanted to do. But the Rivlins didn't want to be conquered, which resulted in a 10-year war where the Rivlins were able to hold them. And the Hadrians were able to keep sending reinforcements to the point that no one was winning. We were just desperately both losing. People kept dying. It was an awful war until the famine hit, in which case a big famine drought hit all of Rivlin land to the point that the Rivlins couldn't grow food to facilitate the war, and they had to surrender.
Right.
So they subjected themselves to be a
vassal
state of the Hadrians, where they still ruled themselves, but they answered the Hadrians. And then there was a year of peace, in which case this whole event took place on the year anniversary of the treaty being signed.
Now there's also one more faction to talk about, and they're called the Suzak-Mar, which are kind of the Eastern
analog.
Yeah, Eastern analog. Really kind of their outfits were honestly really cool.
I think they were the best dressed.
They were the best dressed. I'm gonna give you a shout out right there, Suzak-Mar. You guys looked amazing. But they were very much kind of like Indian inspired and like Asian inspired in general.
So like their lore is that they came from this desert land that had a bunch of oases, and they were like pinnacles of civilization. But the same drought and famine that affected us also affected them so much more severely, to the point that it was almost like a curse upon the land.
Oh, they were also attacked by like monsters.
Yeah, so it was almost like our drought was like an echo of their curse.
Yeah.
To the point that they fled across a land bridge to our land to escape all that, and then huge rains happened, flooded the land bridge, and now they're stuck there.
Right.
So they're like stuck in our land when we're dealing with the Hadrians, and also the Vaterkin, and also them, and everyone's just kind of like in the same area.
One group of land that at one time only held the Rivlins and the Vaterkin kind of, it now has Rivlins, Vaterkins, Hadrians, and the Suzak-Mar, and we're all stuck together.
Yeah, and we're all kind of like jostling to have a home within there.
Which is cool because it gives us almost the setup, almost like a Game of Thrones kind of setup, where we're jostling for power more than anything else. Like, who's going to actually control this land? And you know, are we really going to be controlled by the Hadrian? Are we going to let that happen? Do we really have a choice?
And there's depth to it as well, in the sense that like the Rivlins are city-states. They're not a unified nation.
Right.
So there's half of them that never agreed to the treaty in the first place.
Yeah.
So now the Hadrians say they own them, and they're like, no, you don't.
Yeah, we're a bunch of ranger hippies is what we are.
Yeah, no, like, you can say that, but we're gonna be over here, and if you come here, we're gonna start fighting again.
Right.
So it's this big conflict nest.
Yeah. So that kind of lays the groundwork and kind of explains, like, with Gareth, him getting caught up in this war and kind of going through it. What about you? Who did you play?
I played Evelyn Leonora. So Evelyn was actually kind of on the opposite side. Our characters ended up reflecting each other. Unintentionally. So where he was like a small town farm boy, Evelyn was born to a very wealthy textile and like tailor's family, merchant family. But she was always someone who kind of dreamed of adventure and whatever, and would study ancient, like far off lands and skip out on all her lessons and everything. So the war started when she was around like 11 or 12.
And it bet her whole
entire life, basically. And it started in the city. Like, the Hadrians rolled up to the city where she was from, Goldenfold, to the point that when that became violent, her family fled to Westford, I believe it's called, the next city over. And at that city is where Evelyn discovered that she had the abilities of a bone knitter, which is basically the ability to heal basically any injury in a minute, just completely.
Which
like
pretty sweet.
From like you could be dying and I could just pray at you for a minute.
Spend a minute worth of time.
Like I could massage your shoulders for a minute.
You're back into this, aren't you? You're like, yeah, I am.
And you're just better. And the ability is extremely rare.
Right.
To the point that all of the bone knitters of Rivlin culture basically kind of got pulled into the war, either conscripted or volunteered. So Evelyn, being young and dumb, only like a few years into the war, is like, I'm gonna go help people. Kind of the opposite of
yeah,
Gareth.
I'm like, I don't want to be here. She's
Gareth
like, I can't wait to help.
I can't wait to help. So she goes, and her family's like, don't you dare. Like, you hide your powers. They're gonna conscript you. And she was like, that's good. So she went and she healed people. She went to like a camp of like a field hospital, healed people, got conscripted, and spent the next like 7 or so years of her adult life, formative years, in just front lines,
like guts pouring out of people.
Yeah,
like, you're gonna be fine. Everything's fine.
Like, she was able to heal the worst of injuries. So she was put into that. Like, I imagine all the bone knitters were just shuttled to the worst of places.
Right.
And eventually our characters met because we were both shuttled to the worst of places.
Just frontline.
Where like a battle fell apart, and Evelyn managed to drag Gareth, who had been like near death, off a battlefield of everyone had been scattered or killed. Right. And healed him, and together they managed to like work with each other to get back to safety.
Yeah. And there was like emotional damage because my dog died in that battle too. He like, was my counterpart.
Yeah,
like
and
I had to
sages
learn.
have the ability to heal as well. So like Gareth had to live with the fact that he had healed himself during that battle. Right. And then when Jax fell, he wasn't able to spare the magic.
So there's a lot of that kind of like turmoil there, and he kind of almost, while we were trying to work our way out of, like, we were in enemy lines when everything fell apart, so we were the only ones who were alive. So I was trying to get her out, to protect us both or whatever, and I've kind of adopted her to be my new dog. That's how it is. He's like, I need another partner.
What's the nearest living being?
Perfect. My new dog.
I am dog.
You are dog. Doge.
So I am now the bone knitter.
She's my bone knitter.
To Gareth the Ranger.
Who refuses to call her by her name, by the way, because she's a bone knitter. I call her Knits.
Yeah. No, he refuses to even acknowledge that Evelyn is her name.
Nope.
He never once called her by her name, only called her
Never.
Knits.
Yep. Calling you Knits was one of the highlights for me. Being like, Knits! And everyone's like, who's Knits? I'm like, Knits! Her!
And we'd introduce ourselves to new people, and you'd be like, this is Knits. And I'm like, no, it's not.
It's a lot of fun.
And it got to the end of the LARP, and through everything that had happened, which we'll talk about, through everything that had happened, even Evelyn had started to like
call herself Knits.
and then like immediately recognize what she was doing, and she's like, "Look what you've made me do."
That was very happy time.
I started to call
you
Stabs.
That's true. I don't like that one. So I specifically named him a magic user. His last name is Hexalin.
And I called him Stabs.
I'm like, people are gonna call me Hex, and that's a really badass name. Hex, what's up, Hex? Nope.
Stabs.
It's the most unoriginal drivel. Anyways.
It's supposed to annoy. Now that we have an idea of all of the things that are going on through our random drivel of unorganized nonsense.
Yeah, what is LARP, who we are, all of that.
How did we get there?
Yeah, like, not just how we got there, like the journey of our lives that led us down this LARPy path.
How did we get there physically? Because that was actually a problem.
Yeah, so if you want to go to a LARP out of state, and it's not somewhere you can drive, which, by the way, Kramer from Living Anachronism, he drove, like, what was it, like 13 hours
I have no idea.
To get there. Yeah, soldier, absolute trooper for having driven. And then continued to drive. Yeah, man.
I think he's still driving.
He's probably, to this very day, he is still driving.
He's still driving.
Oh, man. Anyways, so to get there, like, all your stuff has to get there, right?
Yeah.
You have a tent you're going to be in.
There's a lot of luggage that you have to figure out how to shuttle. Like, it's one thing getting yourself to, a lot of times, like, these bigger LARPs are kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So we planned to arrive a day before. We had an Airbnb that we had to get to, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. And then we had to get from the middle of nowhere to the middle of nowhere with no car or anything. So just something to keep in mind, I suppose.
Yeah, iron out those travel arrangements. Not only that, but I went from a business trip, like my regular job. Yeah, you went
from business trip to LARP to business trip. So you were like in between travel, didn't have time or anything to figure anything out. I went from trip to this to like...
Oh, man. So anyways, I'm tricksing through like airports with like 4 huge bags. That canvas tent I built is heavy, like really heavy. So that, all of my armor that I built over the years.
You had to ship, I had family in the area, you had to ship more stuff
I had to
them.
ship my weaponry to them because I couldn't you can't bring a bow on a plane, and I couldn't fit it into any of my, my character is an archer, so I'm like, great.
And then we had to we went with other people, and they had more luggage. So
yeah. So
it was a logistical nightmare.
Plan it. I've learned my lesson.
Know that a lot of these places might be in, like, know the place you're going to, basically. Know if it's in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Know if, say, you might need something with a little more drive to be able to deliver your stuff there.
Yep. Also talk to the people who are throwing the LARP, because like later on, Thomas was just like, oh yeah, you could have just sent it towards me and I would have accepted it for you or whatever if I mailed stuff to him. So, there are ways around it. And the people who are going to the LARP, odds are there's going to be a bunch of people in your group that is local.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, this was our first time, but we went with a group.
Yes.
Even though we almost never interacted with them in the LARP.
Yeah.
Like, just the logistical getting to the LARP of being with a group, like, if you can go, like, reach out to the community that's like in the LARP, find if there's other people that you can kind of meet up with and understand the process of going to it. That definitely helped a lot. Even though all of us had never been to the LARP before, first of all, it was a new one. It helped along the process, just have other people to suffer.
It also helped that, like, we work together, we know each other really well, and having each other to play off of, I think really cushioned that first LARP experience.
Yeah, like going with friends and stuff, which I understand is not, like, an option for a lot of people.
Sure.
Like, having been a person that struggled for years to even get the most basic friends to play D&D, I can only imagine the struggle to get people to go to a
roll
LARP
up to a
with
random
you.
friend being like, so
want to go in the woods for a weekend in sweltering heat
and pretend to be somebody else,
and also spend hundreds of dollars on gear and everything to be able to do it.
Man, it's sad that my first response is absolutely I do. Absolutely, I do.
That's the correct response.
It's the correct response.
I feel like that's the life we live.
So yes, we get there, and it is a drive. By the way, shout out to Maddie's mom. Maddie's mom. So this logistical nightmare was solved because Maddie's mom was in the area, and was able to drive us. We
had just so the week before was Mother's Day, and I had just spent the week with her on a trip for Mother's Day, and then the LARP was in the area of her mother. So she was like, I'm gonna go visit. And we're like, bye. And then we called her later and we're like, can you come back?
We're stuck. There's no Ubers in this little town to be had.
So like she drove us to the Airbnb from the airport and then left. And then we were like, the next morning, we're like, how do we get to the LARP? Because like we're like an hour away with a bunch of stuff and no ride. No. And we couldn't even get like a normal Uber, let alone like a
we
large
walked into
one.
this gas station and be like, do you know of any way for us to get a ride
like,
anywhere? He's like, nope.
So then she drove the hour out to pick us up and then drive us the hour to the LARP and then drive the hour back to where she was staying.
Yeah.
And then came back
to pick us
up. And then after she dropped us at the Airbnb, so that was an hour. And then you left your phone in the car.
She had to come back.
So then she came back, and then she went to lunch with her brother, and then I forgot to give her a thing. So then she came back.
Yeah, long story short, she was a trooper. So huge thanks, Maddie's mom.
Huge thanks.
Yeah, so we get there, and it is sweltering. It is just so hot.
I mean, I'll agree with you because
She's from Florida. It doesn't count. But anyways,
that was fun.
It was really hot, and we had to set up that tent that I built on this one here.
It's weird pointing in that direction when I'm here, isn't it?
Yeah, you're here. I hope you edit it so it just covers your face.
It's this one.
So yeah, I had to set that up, and the thing is, because I was traveling so much, I didn't pack tent poles. I'm like, I'm going to source it from the woods that we were going to be in. We did. I had my hatchet, which I made in another episode. I'm not going to keep pointing up here. Links in the description below. I had a hatchet, and we just started hacking down like already dead trees or whatever to size, tying all the ropes and whatever. It took like an hour.
I was a very good branch stander.
You were very good. But yeah, dying. So hot.
I was fun.
Then we kind of moved into our tent or whatever. Which, by the way, we're gonna have to do an episode on like how to set up a tent.
Our tent was a mess the entire time.
Like a bomb went off.
We had like my bright pink suitcase. No, my bright purple suitcase. But it was the only one that was a hard top. And we just put a blanket over.
So we have like a table of some sort.
And then we could like have our stuff in it.
We were fighting the entire time.
That's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
At a LARP is how to access your stuff, especially if it's something that you want to keep in character, is because we had like an A-frame tent. There's not that much space, especially with 2 beds on either side. We just had the middle.
Yeah.
So like, where do we put our stuff?
Yeah, no, it was, that is definitely a thing we should look into, is like how to set up a tent so it looks correct, like in character correct, but it's also functional, all right? It was harder too because, again, we traveled a long distance, so bringing like shelves and stuff was kind of out of the question.
Minute, so we had to figure out how to throw together everything last minute.
So anyways, we finally get like in our full kit and we're finally in character, and they call basically in session, right? Which is like beforehand, you're still you and you're setting your stuff up and swearing at your tent or whatever. But after they call you to be in session,
then
game
suddenly
starts. You are your character.
Evelyn.
Yeah, I am Gareth, right? We are in character.
So now, from the rest of the video, we
for the rest of the video, we talk in character.
That wasn't Gareth's voice.
It wasn't.
That wasn't Evelyn's
voice.
Yeah,
no, it's hard to find it.
As soon as we call upon it.
We call upon it. So the first thing we do is we actually go to like the banquet that we're there to go to, right? So it was kind of fun because this is when we first really got to see people and see what the different factions were like.
I actually found that whole thing very interesting because it was very much feeling out what it was like to be in a LARP.
Right.
Socially.
Right.
So I think you kind of took the more observatory route.
Sure.
I took very much the more shove myself into people's conversations and talk about random nonsense route.
Yeah.
Where I went to I talked to a Vaterkin.
Which is the Viking.
The Viking analog.
Right.
And ended up eventually talking to a bunch of other Vaterkin, and we discussed eventually like starting a whole business for them to ship down snow because this climate was too hot for them. And then we talked about what everyone's favorite type of snow. It was just nonsense conversation, but it eventually led to me just going to everyone that I met and asking them what their favorite type of snow was so that I could relay it back to the Vaterkin so that he could start his snow business.
So one thing I found with some of these fun kind of nonsensical conversations is it was almost that beginning part of it was like practicing being your character. Like everybody's getting to know, like, because it is, so a lot of times when you talk about LARPs, and we don't have a lot of pictures or footage or whatever because it's super personal. You're dressing up and you're pretending to be somebody else, and for an outside observer who's watching this take place,
in the moment.
It might look funny, it might look whatever, and but when you're there, it's not. It actually feels really natural and really fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing we talked about before of like even things that break immersion, like you just glide over it because in that moment you're in that world. You're in that like we had showers available to us. We had porta potties, whatever. But it never felt unnatural to have modern things.
Conveniences, yeah.
Because it just kind of meshed into the immersion of the world we were in.
And I'm a strong proponent. All of us, LARP every day. You go into a business place in which you dress the part and you pretend to be this professional person or whatever.
Yeah, we all have the different masks.
Yeah,
that we put on
like you do it
day.
all the time, and when you do it, this is just a different degree of it, right? Where you're pretending to be a better version of yourself. I know I do when I'm like in a business setting. Here, you're just pretending to be just someone else completely, right?
Yeah, and like you said, it's a very personal thing for a lot of people, because it does. When you open yourself to be that different of a person, it makes yourself a little bit vulnerable.
Sure.
Which is why like people don't typically like to be filmed or photographed unless it's by like a professional.
Right. So we go to this banquet, which is kind of like the beginning purpose of it, and that beginning bit was really good to feel out who we are and how we play with other people. And my character, very much, I wanted to go into it of him being kind of roguish, to be honest. Unbeknownst to everybody else, like secretly roguish.
So he was more of like the moved when he needed to.
Yeah.
Like observed everything. He was used to being in the woods and just watching everything and moving when he needed to. Meanwhile, Evelyn is the complete opposite, where like I think someone called me a hummingbird, where I was
just
constantly
place to place.
So Kramer, a living anachronism, he made a comment once that one time during the LARP he was having a conversation with someone on that steep hill that led to the Rivlin camp. So basically the way that the camps are set up is there's the main central camp, and each faction has their own like faction camp. So the Rivlin one is like a steep hill leading down to it. And he was having a conversation with someone, and he was like, in the course of that conversation, you ran by me. At least, like, ran up and down that hill at least 5 times. In the end, like, as we were packing up our camp, I ran up and down that hill to bring us our stuff just for the sheer hell of it. Because I was like, this is the last time I'm going to run up and down this hill. Like, this hill and me are best buddies at this point.
LARP is also really good exercise, guys.
It is.
It's
it was
such good
exercise. Bring snacks.
Yeah, lots of snacks.
And water. Well, a lot of LARPs they provided us water. Bring ways to carry it.
Yeah, carrying
Keep yourselves hydrated.
Yeah.
By God, keep yourselves hydrated.
Yeah. So yeah, my character was like a secretly roguish kind of character, and immediately my kind of modus operandum was to just kind of spy, basically. I started spying on people.
You're just eavesdropping.
Eavesdropping.
Just a light eavesdropping.
And I very much wanted to talk to, so there was one NPC, non-player character, named the Countess, who's supposed to be like the spider, right? Like the yeah, like anything that technically wasn't legal was the Countess's kind of area of expertise.
So she was all dressed in all purple, which is important in Reckoning because purple signifies a non-combatant, which means you can't attack them and they can't attack you.
Right.
But she kind of walked between the different faction bases and was always kind of around if you wanted to finagle some under the hand deals.
Yeah, some little,
which came in later in the story as a bigger thing.
But
first, that banquet that we were at, after we finished eating, became a little bit more tense.
Yeah, so we had just kind of finished eating. Everybody was kind of having a good time and just vibing. And all of a sudden, you hear So, all right, really quickly. Again, how we mentioned before, how the Hadrians were the invading army, right?
And this whole banquet was set up at insistence of the Empress.
Right.
Of the Hadrians.
Of the Hadrians. So they're already, like, all the other factions are really tense towards the Hadrians, especially because they're the aggressors. Yeah. And the Hadrians, honestly, that at the very beginning of that, they were jerks. Like, they were talking trash to us the whole time, being like, well, you learned how to surrender, didn't you? Like, stuff like that. So they were egging us on a bit where all of us were like, I don't like you. So, all of a sudden, yelling starts. And one of the other NPCs gets kind of dragged into our camp,
Which is one of our faction leaders.
You're one of our faction
leaders. From Rivlin. So basically every faction has 2 faction leaders. I didn't see the other faction leaders very much, except for the Hadrians. But ours were the bailiff and the marshal.
Right.
And then we also had the Viscount, but that was Thomas, the guy who ran the LARP. Right. So he tended to be busy with other things.
Yeah. So the marshal was dragged into the camp, having been found rifling through the papers of the Hadrian.
Yeah, the letters to the Empress to see if they could find any sort of like plans or information while the rest of the Hadrians were at the banquet.
So with that kind of happening, what was it? Thomas had come up. What his character was?
Viscount.
The Viscount. Yeah. So he came up and was like, "Hey, everything that happens here is my responsibility.
Yeah, because
I take responsibility
I'm the leader.
for this.
She's my responsibility. Like, let's all calm down.
And at this point, I didn't see, like, it looked legit. Nothing looked out of place to me, right? On him. Nothing looked out of place to me. So when they took him and were like, fine, you're going to pay the price, and they bring his hand down, and they bring a sword down, and his hand comes off, I was like, woo! Like, I was right over them. I was behind them because I was eavesdropping on the whole thing, right? So, like, his hand totally came off, and it was well done. Like, once it was off, you can tell it was a prop hand or whatever. But all up into that moment, I didn't see that it was fake at all, and I was standing right over his shoulder. It was good.
Yeah, that was definitely something that they had, like, thought out through to make it as like, impactful as possible.
Right.
And then they, like, hold up the hand and, like, this is what happens to people who cross Hadron, like, whatever.
Yeah, it was good.
Which is funny, because that kind of level of what they, like, the Hadrons were never again like that. From then on, they became almost the most reasonable faction.
Yeah, they were pretty good, but
we'll get into that later.
Yeah. So then they were like, all right, you know what? Because this has been so tense, how about we have some nice games, right? So they started an arena battle.
An arena battle. They had an arena set up, and they're like, why don't we have people kind of like fight at the arena to ease tension?
Right.
Meanwhile, we'll start with me because I think it's more fun that way.
Go for it.
So I'm a bow knitter. The first thing I think is like, oh God, a guy just got his hand cut off. I can heal basically everything. I'm gonna go heal him. So he gets taken down the Rivlin camp, and I follow behind, and I eventually run into the bailiff, and I'm like, hey, is there anything I can do to potentially heal him that looked like a pretty bad wound? Is he okay?
Look like a pretty bad wound.
He got his hand
missing
cut
a
off.
hand. Yeah, I say that looks pretty bad.
I mean, you have to remember, I've been at the front lines of war for 10 years, so it's like that's
doable.
It's doable.
All right.
And he's like, yeah, no, it can be healed as long as you get the hand to be brought back. So I'm like, cool. Who do I know that's really good at stealing things? So I go up to where the whole arena is being held. And earlier in my little quest for talking about what everyone's favorite type of snow is, I had run into the Countess, who I had spoken to before about snow. About how her favorite type of snow is snow that is still yet falling, and yet, like, no one knows what it's gonna be yet. So I kind of played on that, and I was like, eventually led to a conversation. I was like, is there anything I can do to get the hand back, or any information you have about where the hand went was specifically our deal. She was like, if you bring me the hand, I can reward you. And I was like, cool, but do you have any information of where the hand is? And she was like, you'll have to find out. So my plan was basically to find him, bring her the hand, and since she specifically said bring her the hand, not give her the hand,
right?
Trick you played on me in D&D.
I
was gonna then leave.
I did it.
I did it. It's here. Goodbye. So I spent like a good 5 to 10 minutes looking for you. Meanwhile,
so I
think it's better if I eventually find you.
Right.
And I'm like, Gareth, we need to get the hand. And what do?
I pull the hand out from under my arm and say, done.
You're like, this hand?
Yeah.
I'm like, you're magical. How'd you get the hand?
Yeah, so, rewind, Tarantino, rewind this stuff right here, right? So, the hand thing happens. I had already introduced myself to that spider of a woman, the Countess, letting her know that I was into some more, like, nefarious things. So she sidles up to me, and she just kind of goes, you want to be in? Get me the hand. And just walked away. And I was like, that was pretty cool. So immediately, because I'd just been spying and kind of getting to know people, I sit down and start just kind of being, like, charming with people, just, like, joking and stuff.
Like the table next to the commander who had the hand.
Who has the hand. He has it in front of him. So I sit down to the table next to them, and they're kind of joking around, because I think they were...
you were making hand puns?
Yeah, we were just like, gotta lend them a hand. That was pretty intense, huh? So I'm watching it, and the guy gets up, and he starts walking away. I'm like, easy, I'm gonna lift this in a second, right? Because he forgets the hand on the table. I'm like, woo, thieving it, no problem. I watch it dawn on him, and he goes, oh. turns around and picks up the hand and puts it in. I'm like, no! Like, my easy lift is gone, right?
So now you have to resort to other means.
Right, so I get up and I start tailing him without making it look like I'm tailing him, going to see the events or whatever, right? I make a full circuit of the arena, whatever. I come back around to him and he just has it. And I overhear him and his head of the guard being like, hey, you flew off the handle, though. That's not why we're here. This is supposed to be a peaceful thing. Like, we shouldn't have done that. And he's like, yeah, but they have to learn their lesson. So I dive in and I go, I'm sorry. I can't help but overhear this. On behalf of my people, I think that was wrong. And you're right. We're here for peace. And they shouldn't have been
spying on you. Like rifling through your camp, trespassing.
And he's like, right? I know, right? And I'm like, it would do me the honor if you gave me that hand so I could burn it and make sure that the gods of the Rivlin know that this isn't something we will actually stand for. And he's like, I like that. He goes, yeah, it should be one of you who burns it short. And he just gives it to me.
And then you stick it under your arm.
Because I didn't want anybody else to know I had it.
And you had it for like 30 minutes up until the point that I found you, which is all like that happened rather quickly. So then that is all the time it took for me to walk all the way to the Rivlin camp.
Try to heal him,
get the information, walk all the way back, have the conversation with Spider, look for you for like 15 minutes. I think in the, like, I don't know if it was like right after you talked to them, because you wandered around for a while after.
I talked to Kramer from Living in Anachronism, his character Beryl. Like, we had a conversation because I'm trying to find the spider, and I don't know where. I call her the spider. She's not called that in game, but my character called her the spider. I had it under my arm and I talked to him. Somebody else walked up to me and was like, I'm trying to find the hand, this and that. Theseus, I'm trying to find the hand, this and that. And I'm like, really? And the whole time it's like, just underneath.
Good luck with that.
I'm like, good luck with that. I'm not sure where it is, just kind of pointing him away or whatever. And then she rolls up to me and she's like, Gareth, we need to find that hand. And I'm just like, this hand?
I'm like, so magical.
So we've come full circle here.
Yeah, so then we talk about it. We're like, okay, we both talked to the spider. So the plan is, like, you made her promise that the hand would be
reattached.
Like, it would be given back to the Viscount. Yeah. Which eventually it was kind of shuttled through a bunch of people, which caused a lot of tension between Gareth and the Countess.
Which this I liked about her. So being kind of the schemer she was, like, to the letter of the word, she did intend to have it given back, but after it changed hands a bunch of times. So I made 4 silver off of that, right?
And which she made like 7.
Yeah, so I gave her the hand, she paid me. And I'm like, cool, that'll make its way back.
And she also got a favor out of the Viscount.
Yeah. But then it turned out, listening to other people, that she put it back in circulation and had other people, like...
Oh, that's what happened. So she just, like, left it so that other people would find it.
Yeah, so that more money kind of flowed around or whatever. Like, I got screwed out of that deal. The last person I know traded that hand and got 6 silver for it. And I was like, I remember I was passing by her. I'm like, somebody got 6 silver for that. Seems like if somebody were to give it up for less, they got real screwed, huh? And
she was like, seems like.
Seems like it. And kept walking. I was like, you mother. I was very upset about that.
Especially how fast you got it.
Oh, yeah. I got that so quick. Like, I was so proud. I was so proud of myself for being able to get that.
Like, in the gap between you getting it and then you did, like, me finding you.
Sure.
I tried to get it. So I went up, and at that point, the commander and the head guard were watching the festivities, the fighting and whatever. And I tried to talk to the commander. By that point, I had no idea who was who. So I was like, cool, person in red. So all the factions are color-coded. So red is Hadrian's, green is Rivlin's, yellow is Suzak Mar,
and blue is
Vatican.
Yeah.
So person in red that's dressed more fancily than most other people. I tried to talk to them. And it was the commander, which I like learned later, but he kind of just wasn't paying attention to me. He was like, yeah, cool, and then turned back to it. I was like, okay, next person. So I went to the person next to him, and it was the head guard. And Evelyn, my character, started this whole deep conversation with the head guard, where we started to talk about peace and war, because Evelyn started to comment on the fighting of the pit arena and how she never really viewed fighting as something to be enjoyed, to be watched before.
Right.
So I started talking about Peace and how the head guard, which I still don't remember his name. It became a running joke where every time I would see him, I would never remember his name. I would remember everything else we talked about except his name, except that it was close to the word Vatterkin. So I only ever remembered Vatterkin. And like we talked about how he got into being a soldier because he wanted to find peace for his family, and how he had 2 children. One was a daughter around Evelyn's age. Her name was Anastasia, and he called her like Stasia, but all of her friends called her Anna. And like
I love the little details people added to their character
and it was
backstories.
like weird for him, for everyone to call her a different name than what he was used to her being called. And they had this deeper connection of just kind of, Evelyn was like, I wish my father, because her family eventually died in the war. Like, she went on and fought in the war and never even knew that her family, they had been in like a trade caravan trying to flee further from the war. And the Hadrians had mistaken them for like a supply caravan and attacked, thinking that it was like a supply caravan to help the war efforts. And her family died in it. And so they kind of bonded almost over this. Like she even made they talked about if Evelyn would ever have children. Evelyn kind of made little comments of like she wished her father had been able to make a world that he was trying to make for his children. And eventually later on, after the hand had been established and everything, she even got closer friends with the commander and the head guard and brought them drinks. And we joked about how they're like, make sure to include the poison. And I was like, I don't know, what poison do you prefer? And they're like, the poison that makes you die without vomiting, because it would be a shame to waste good mead. Yeah.
It's fun because it kind of it plays into some stuff that happened later, which again, when you're getting into this RP, like all that story and stuff just kind of happened organically. Like you all had your backstories or whatever, but the conversation that happened and the story you made together is really cool. And where it ends up going later on, I think is really, really fun. So later on, the night progresses, right? And at this point, we've all kind of...
Yeah, eventually, the hand gets...
Yeah, where it's going to go.
First, I think... the other 2 events happen.
Right.
So I think the monster hunt happened next.
Yeah. So we're sitting there, we're just kind of enjoying drinks or whatever, and
we're getting to know people. We're actually, I think we're having drinks with the head guard at that point. He joins us, and we're singing songs,
which was awesome.
And drinking.
Shout out to Ash, by the way, as well, who's there singing with us. We just met a lot of great people. But so yeah, we're singing songs, and someone rolls up to me and is like, "Hey, we're going to hunt monsters in the woods. You want to come?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Of course I want to come."
That sounds awesome.
2 groups, we roll in different directions, split up.
We get there, and then someone says something about splitting.
Yeah.
So then we get separated, like hard split, where they're like, you go over there, you go over there.
Right.
We get split up, and there's 2 paths into the woods.
Right.
You go down the nicer path.
It is pitch black, by the way. It is the woods at night. Like, people have torch that looks like flaming torches, but they don't give off a lot of light. It is just straight up dark.
And not only is it dark, but, like, everything's pretty uneven, muddy. Eventually there's a creek, which I find.
My path is pretty circular. Like, it's not that long.
Yeah, you head back to the Rivlin camp. That's eventually the path that we go on later.
Yeah. But her path...
My path just goes into the woods forever.
People got, like, lost for a little bit.
Yeah,
and, like,
so,
it was intense.
Yeah, no, we walked until we hit the creek. And we only knew it was the creek because some people tripped and fell in it. I knew it was the creek eventually because I was walking and I was wearing a long skirt at that point. And I was like, why is the bottom of my skirt getting so wet? I was like, oh, it's a creek. And then eventually we turned around and went back, but some people, like, we were broken up, so I eventually found you, and...
We went back to try to find the people who were lost.
Yeah, we had to go about and find... And in the end, we found out that it was never a monster hunt to begin with.
Somebody just randomly, like the showrunners didn't do it.
Yeah.
Just a random person was like, I want to go hunt monsters.
Some players were like, let's go hunt monsters in the woods. So they just got up and walked and like asked a bunch of people along the way, want to go hunt monsters?
Here's the irony with that, though, because as people were actually wandering around the woods hunting monsters,
a majority of the fighters of everything were in the woods. An actual monster came and attacked camp.
So, and when I say an actual monster, if you've not kind of played these games or whatever, like somebody in full costume, and it was big, like they were big.
Like a troll. It was
like
a troll.
A troll, right? But like really well done, really like long arms, and he was really cool.
I'm really disappointed I didn't get to see it.
And their hit points, it's like if you play a video game, the hit points for this thing is out of control. And if you get hit by it, doesn't matter what you're wearing for armor or whatever, they're a cursed creature. So them hitting you wipes out your armor. In 2 hits, no matter who you are, you're down, right?
So it's a thing.
It's a thing. Like it's a battle, right? So there's this group of us just attacking this thing. It's kind of funny because I was heading back from the Rivlin camp by myself. With the bailiff. Both of us are just kind of walking back. And we see the troll coming, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody yells monster. The whole group of people, there's like 20 people, get up and they start running. And they just see shadowy me coming down a path. So they start attacking towards me. They go, monster! And they're running. Meanwhile, this friggin' 8-foot troll
is coming around
comes
the
up
tent,
behind them. Right? And I'm like, stop! Look! And then they all stop and they turn around. And he's just behind them.
Monster behind them. That sounds epic. I wish I could have
really
seen it.
Cool.
Instead, we walked forever into the woods because, like, while his path of nonsense looped and eventually came back to the Rivlin camp, mine did not. Mine continued forever. Eventually, in the distance, we heard like people yelling. We're like, monster! We're like, they must be nearby. Hello? Is anyone? Like, we were literally yelling, like, where are we supposed to be?
Help! So this is kind of a cool place to get into what combat is like at a LARP. So like we're talking about archers, and so you've seen when I made Sting and stuff that swords similar to that, really kind of realistic looking swords. People have pole arms, and then we have I made those LARP arrows, so you have arrows, but you're shooting this thing. The poor, I think it was Thomas inside of the costume, it turned out, like just getting the crap beat out of him. People are like wailing on him, but he has this huge sword that he's swinging.
Of that cinematic like cut back and forth between this epic fight and then a bunch of people lost in the woods and this epic fight. And then,
like, where are you?
I remember hearing someone yell, "I've got the troll's sword," and we're just like, "Where are you?"
Flash to our scene, like, "I need a heal or somebody's down," and you're like, "It's so dark.
Where is everyone? Why is everything wet?"
But it was cool. Like, we even had those scenes where like some people did go down. You have the bone knitters trying to heal them. The Hadrian bone knitter he played up the science the doctor role, is like trying to heal somebody, and they're screaming because they're hurting. You know what I mean? And they're really playing that up. And it made the whole scene really cool because you have this troll that's losing his friggin' mind over here, and everybody trying to take it down, and you have people being like dragged off of the battlefield, and like people are healing them like, "Are you all right? Can you hear me?" Right? It just, you get super lost in that moment. Meanwhile, it is dark. Like, it is the woods at night.
Yeah, it was real dark.
Only firelight is really lighting stuff, like torches and stuff, right? So the whole vibe, you get straight up lost in it. It was a lot of fun. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, so eventually we found our way back. And by then, like, all the fighting and stuff was over. And you were just like, "Where were you?" And I was like, "In the woods." I don't know. Like, will you help me go find the people? And we had to go find all the people that we had left behind.
In the woods. Fend for yourself.
Fend for yourself. Yeah, we went and we collected the peoples. We also discovered where the Hadrian camp was. So, that was the second event of the night, which wasn't, well, the troll event was planned. Us wandering in the woods wasn't, which was really funny because after that, because I had been the one to push healing the hand to the Viscount, who was also Thomas, I I got called eventually, like, oh, we finally got the hand. Like, if the Countess finally worked it through her measures and gave it to the Viscount with a favor attached, which we cover later. And so I get called to heal it, and I do. In the meantime, he was like, what's been going on? I've been resting. And I was like, well, because originally I thought it was a story plot thing of... Like,
going into the woods to hunt a monster.
Yeah, no, like a bunch of, like most of the fighters had been led away on a fake monster hunt while a real monster attacked the camp.
Right.
It seemed
it does sound like a setup.
It sounds like a setup. So I was like, it was really strange. Like, we went into the woods and we just wandered forever. And he was like, you went into the woods?
But let me preface this too by saying that there were no children. Like, it was all adults.
Yeah,
so,
no,
like...
but it's that kind of thing of just like...
You did what?
Like a bunch of just randomly wandered into the woods, and then because we didn't know any better, we just followed them.
It's just a bunch of sheep to the slaughter.
Good LARP question to ask is to make sure you know what people are doing before you
just follow them into the woods. Yeah.
Make sure there's like some sort of...
Yeah.
We were the sheep to the slaughter.
Yeah, so let me jump into the next little story beat that kind of happened, because that was very much a me thing, too, where, so we're sitting, and again, the night has calmed down. We're all drinking, singing,
like,
just
the
kind
fights are over,
fights
we
are
found
over.
the hand, healed it.
And honestly, I was under the impression that that was the last story beat of the night.
It was late
It was
well.
late, yeah. There's this next bit probably happened around like 11, 12 o'clock at night.
Because we ended up being up till like 2.
Yeah. So we're sitting there, and I'm kind of a few tables away from Kramer's character from Living Anachronism, Beryl. And he's there, and they're having a conversation with somebody. So I have my back turned towards them, and suddenly somebody yells out, "I need a bone knitter!" Right? And then
you just hear bone knitter.
Yeah, I just hear bone knitter and throat slash. That's all like I hear is throat. That's right. Bone knitter and throat slash, right? And then somebody pointing at somebody saying he did it. So,
who's running away?
And a guy running away. So I'm like, gotta catch him. So I get up and I start running. And this is where it's very much real life, where, you know, it's like, if somebody's getting like beat up in a subway, there's like one person who might help and a bunch of onlookers who don't want to get into it, so somebody else does.
I ran to where they were like, we need a bone knitter. So
Right.
I'm like, I am a bone knitter. I didn't know what was going on. So I ran, and by then there was already like 2 bone knitters on him. So I'm like, I am useless.
Yeah. And when she says on him, the person who got their throat slit was Beryl. It was Kramer's character. He was just in a conversation, and somebody slid a coin over to him in the conversation and said something like, this is for like, it was,
let's just give this like to pay to the funerals or the
to
people,
pay for the funeral or something.
to give to the people lost or something. I forget
Yeah.
the exact wording.
And
it
then,
was very much like for the families of you.
Yeah, exactly. And then slit his throat and
Yeah.
then ran, right? So I make chase in the woods in the night. So I'm running after this guy, and he's booking. And we come down this dirt road.
I don't see you chase him at all. I don't notice you.
Oh, I disappear into the night.
Yeah, I don't notice you being part of it at all, because my main focus is like person with the throat slit. I am a healer. I can help.
And I'm talking crap the whole time. I'm like, you can't run. You can't get away from me. Right? So I get
and he can't.
Yeah, he turned and immediately attacks me. Like, he has his dagger and he's stabbing at me in the night. So I have my sword, and I initially like stumble back away from him, but then I'm fighting with a dude like. Yeah, LARPing is fun. I'm fighting on this dude in the road at night, right? And so he turns and starts running away the other way. And that by this time, people have started to follow, like, all right, there's some stuff happening over here on the road.
Yeah, and then what you didn't know is that he had kind of led you into the Suzak Mar camp.
Oh, right, which is a no-no. Like, you rolling into somebody else's camp.
To run into someone's camp and then attack someone.
Yeah, and he had been traveling with them the whole time. So as far as they're concerned,
him.
So he starts saying that I'm the aggressor and I'm trying to kill him.
Yeah, as everyone starts coming up to see what's happening, he's like, he's attacking me, please help.
And they came just like, as we got into that camp, he comes at me again. And then I was able to put him down. Like, I blocked him and I hit him a few times and I put him to his knees, but I didn't like kill him. I disarmed him and put him down.
Yeah.
So I'm there at sword point. I'm like, give up, right? And then other people come around.
And they have like glaives.
Glaives and like rest a blade on my neck. And they're like, who are you?
Because I know him.
Right. So now I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it was very much like, I know him. I don't know you.
Yep, and
what's going on here?
He's on his knees being like, he's trying to kill me. He attacked me, right? So I'm just like, I put my sword down. I'm like, peace. You can go out there. He slit somebody's throat and ran. I caught him. That's what I did.
And he attacked you first.
Yeah. So I'm very forcefully told to leave their camp.
And then later told that they wanted you executed.
They wanted me executed, yep, and they were able to be talked down by our...
Marshal.
The Marshal. The Marshal was able to talk them down from executing me for entering their camp and attacking
someone.
Which, it was cool, though. So that whole scene, Beryl gets healed. And by the way, again, kudos to Kramer for his role play, because, like, he didn't have to.
For the rest of the event, he wore, like, a scarf
He
around
wore a
his
scarf
neck
where
and,
it would hurt,
like,
and kind of talked a little bit like his throat was slit,
Yeah.
Like,
he committed to it.
He straight up committed to that. So later, it turned out the person who slit his throat was under a spell of some sort, right? We don't know who did it.
Eventually we find out it might be one of the other factions, but even then's like really wibbly.
Yeah, so we just know he wasn't in his right mind when he did it. He was asked to do it or forced to go do it.
But he was in his right mind when he asked us for money for information about who did it.
He waltzes into our camp, the Rivlin camp, with a couple of people there to sell the information of who did it and potentially why.
Because at this point, he is being protected by the Suzak Mar.
Right.
And he knows it. And he also knows that he's going to be interrogated the next morning.
Right.
Because the Suzak Mar has made a deal with the bailiff to, like, bring him for interrogation.
Right.
So he's like, this is my chance. I'm going to give you, like, the information.
Right.
If you pay me.
Yeah. So they roll into the camp, and they're just, like, trying to have... They wanted to draw as many people as possible. I think, in fact, he's just like, oh, is this all you have?
Yeah, because there was a bunch of people at a campfire nearby just kind of celebrating.
I bring everybody, I'm like, Rivlins!
Yeah, because in the meantime, he was kind of like, is this really all the people you want to listen to this? And you were like, oh yeah, you want more people? Rivlins! By the way, this is the guy that slit the throat of one of our own earlier today. Why don't all of us just join into the conversation?
So he is surrounded, and the person who was playing the guy who slit the throat was good. Like, his role play was so good, right? So we're having this conversation, and he's being a real prick.
Yeah.
Like, just a jerk about it, knowing he has one over on us and that he has information.
Like, so, like, in that moment, it felt kind of like, wait, so, and then I verbalized it in character. I was like, wait, so you slit one of our own throat, use the excuse of you being controlled, but then also trying to monetary benefit from it. And he, like, snapped at me like, you need to be quiet, little girl.
Yeah,
basically.
like, learn your place, woman.
Yeah.
Which, Garrett, like... Evelyn is Gareth's bone knitter.
Yeah.
And Gareth does not have that. So I immediately was like, all right, you're going to come into our camp and talk like that. Like, it was in each other's face. So Beryl eventually, living out, he wanted to hear the information. He's like, I want to hear this information.
Yeah, especially since he was like, I was the one whose throat was slit. I decide how this goes. Tell me the information.
So I
everyone calm down.
Circle around him because I wanted to be behind the guy, right? So I'm behind him, but his bodyguard does not like that. So he goes to put his glaive on my neck. So I have my sword. So we're behind him, pushing against each other,
like
blades.
Hard enough that like your
our
arms
hands
are
shaking. Both of us are just pushing blades against each other while the whole conversation is happening.
I'm just standing next to him, just fearless as can be.
Yeah. In fact, when he was done with the conversation in which he said that, like, we were going to be attacked later on, like, the following day.
So basically what he said was that the Hadrians were planning to attack us.
Right.
But that wasn't our main concern.
Right.
Was that the Rivlins had been marked for something bigger.
Yeah.
Had a grudge against the Rivlins.
There's something worse than the Hadrian.
Something worse is coming, and that we should be cautious about sundown tomorrow.
Right.
Which we find out later
is a thing.
What that might be.
Yeah, then he goes to leave and, like, tries to shoulder bump me out of the way, but I was already so stiff from here. So he, like, hits resistance, and I'm like, step around, boy, which was awesome. Like, I was very proud of it, because even later on, he found me, like, out of character. He was like, that was a great scene! But it was good. But then the night kind of trailed off. We had one more interaction.
Because we had been told that the Hadrians might attack us, and it seemed so counterproductive to everything that the Hadrians wanted from the banquet, which was they wanted the peace to go right. They had no reason to break the peace, because they were the one that facilitated it. That I decided, like you said, we need to go tell some of the higher ups about this so that more is known.
Right.
So you wanted to call the Viscount into it. And I'm like, we need to also call the head guard. Maybe not the commander, because he seems more the hot-headed one.
Right.
But the head guard seems to genuinely want peace in this, because Evelyn had had a moment with him earlier, and we had also drank with him, sang with him, gotten to know him better. So we pulled all four of us into a conversation, in which case we let him know what had been said, of just hey, this guy says that he was charmed by a Hadrian.
Right.
And that he specifically knew that the Hadrians were planning to attack us. We're not saying that you need to break any of your loyalties or whatever, but if you really do strive for peace, this is just something you can try to facilitate from the other side to mitigate, or something like that. And also letting the Viscount know, hey, your people might be attacked. And through this whole conversation with the head guard, it eventually became more of an Evelyn him conversation, where the other two of you just kind of listened, where we talked about how he eventually started mentioning his original orders of coming into invading Rivlin territory, because he was talking about his in the end I have to do what my orders are.
Right.
And he accidentally revealed that in the very beginning, the Hadrians, at least his orders, were always subjugation.
Right.
Was always violence, basically. He was ordered to come in and, diplomacy was never an option.
Put a boot on your throat.
Put a boot on our throat and take over Rivlin land, which is not the narrative that everyone had been told. The narrative had been told that they had come in and tried diplomacy, and that through a failure of diplomacy on both sides, war had broken out.
Right.
So Evelyn, who had gotten to know him and gotten close to him almost,
yeah,
and that
it was
point,
a really good scene.
It was wait,
super betrayal. Yeah.
and also she had hated the Hadrians up until that point, where she actually bothered to meet some of them outside war.
Right.
So she was starting to
oh, these are just people who get conscripted or whatever. Yeah.
That are just and then to be told no. We came to subjugate you. There was never an option of peace. It was always going to be violence. There was that moment where I remember almost feeling like Evelyn was going to cry.
Yeah.
And being you came here with violence.
Yeah, it was good. It was a really a moment.
It was such a moment that Gareth was we're leaving now.
Yeah.
The information has been shared. We're leaving now.
Yeah.
I had Thomas come up to me later that night out of character and be that scene.
Yeah.
He was that scene was really tense. That was it was a really
I like those ones where you
scene.
have to break character and be I need you to know that scene was awesome.
Yeah.
Those are great.
The thing is, to me, it didn't even feel that big of a moment. It felt very subtle but powerful.
Yeah.
Of just kind of I didn't yell or anything. It was just us talking.
Right.
But it was the knowledge that was shared.
Yeah.
And kind of the emotional impact of it.
All right, everyone. So that was night number 1. Because this is such a long thing, we want to kind of talk about it in depth. We're going to break this up into some multiple episodes. I think this is the first multi-episode thing we've ever done here in Skill Tree.
Also the first story. Also the first me.
Oh, of course, yes. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this kind of first foray into what Reckoning LARP is. We will be covering it more in episode the second on this one. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Definitely, if you like what we're doing here, I know it's a little bit different, but make sure you hit that thumbs up, love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when we release new content.
You can do it.
That was all one breath. That took... the YouTube things. Do all of that.
The YouTube things. You're familiar with YouTube at this point.
Do it.
Do it.
Yeah. In the meantime, though... You want to say it?
No.
No.
I honestly forgot it in the moment, because it's one of those things that you've listened to so many times.
Just
keep leveling up you.
Yeah,
that's what I
is.
imagined, but then I felt like it was wrong.
Want to do it one more time?
Sure.
All right. In the meantime, though...
Keep leveling up you.
She did it.
I did it. Where are we going to go? Because I'm on a yoga ball.
No, we're going to stay right here because we're going to start filming part 2 immediately.
We're going to stare deeply into your eyes. And you're going to watch the next one because we asked nicely.
Sounds like you told them.
We're going to tell you nicely.
Thank you for watching. Bye. You've made it to the end screen. Thank you for watching this long YouTube reel. I know there's a really long one too. YouTube loves when you stay to the end.
Even longer.
What is wrong with you at this point, honestly? Anyways, I wanted to take this moment to shout out all of these incredible people. If not for them, we wouldn't be able to do this and go to LARPs and have any of the stuff that we wore to go to LARPs. So, yeah, thank you. If you want to join their noble ranks, consider joining our Patreon. Link in the description below.
Or you can watch any of those videos down there. YouTube likes that too.